Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of dense, often messy source material and extract the crucial, high-value insights, ensuring you are instantly up to speed.
Today, we're not looking at a policy paper or some historical text. We are diving deep into a transcript that captures conflict in its purest, most aggressive form. A high-stakes, multi-party live debate conducted online.
And the source material is really something. It's a raw, minute-by-minute account of a confrontation titled Gustakh Khan, which is, a profoundly serious question. It means, who is the blasphemer?
And the stakes, as you just said, are, well, they're existential for the people involved. We're dealing with issues of theological integrity, personal reputation, and really communal identity.
Right, and our main focus is going to be on the strategic exchange between the two main figures who are known here as Seeker and Fateh Islam.
And it's all happening under the, let's say, nominal moderation of people like Afzal Sahib, Zishan Sahib, and Oways.
Nominal is definitely the right word here. They seem to struggle to keep a lid on things.
They really do.
Yeah.
And look, our mission here isn't to judge the theology. We're not getting into who's right or wrong on a religious level. Instead, we're performing, you could say, an autopsy on the rhetoric.
Yeah, we're deconstructing how Seeker, who is the person initially facing this very grave accusation, manages to deploy language and procedural tactics with such surgical precision that he just flips the entire confrontation on its head.
It's a deep dive into procedural leverage, linguistic pivots, and ultimately how strategic use of speech can turn a defensive liability into a powerful offensive weapon. We're basically watching one person seize and then hold total narrative control.
That's the core puzzle we're tackling, isn't it? How do you win a debate when you start with what seems like an undeniable vulnerability? Seeker's ability to use his own apology, his own contrition, as a weapon of, well, mass tactical advantage is what makes this transcript just so fascinating. Okay, let's unpack this intricate conflict, starting at the very beginning, the immediate clash over the rules themselves.
So the transcript kicks off with immediate and systemic friction.
Yeah.
There's a fundamental, just a jarring disagreement about the very purpose of them all being there.
Right. Seeker seems to think it's about one thing.
Exactly. He seems to have prepared for a discussion on a broad, totally unrelated Pakistan topic, which suggests a miscommunication or, maybe even an intentional attempt by him to broaden the scope.
But Fateh Islam and the moderators, they are laser focused, aren't they?
Oh, completely. They are singularly focused on a pre-existing challenge. It's all about a response to Seeker's past controversial remarks that are being alleged as blasphemy.
And that initial friction, that's key. It establishes the power dynamic right from the first second. Seeker wants a general chat. Fateh Islam wants a highly specific, almost legalistic prosecution.
And he acts instantly to enforce that. He imposes these rigid procedural preconditions, all designed to just box Seeker in.
What's the first move he makes?
His first tactical demand is, it's highly sophisticated, it's very legalistic. Fateh Islam insists that Seeker must formally, under oath, commit in writing that the past statements made by himself and an associate, Amir Haq, were definitively not blasphemous, not gustakh.
So this isn't just, hey, say you didn't do it. This is a formal, documented thing.
It's a demand for a documented, almost legally binding commitment. He's trying to turn a debate into a courtroom.
And he frames this as iso esse anisuli, bata matter of usul, or, a fundamental principle, a procedural necessity.
Right. He's not just being bureaucratic. He's appealing to a standard of conduct for these high-stakes religious debates. He even references previous confrontations, with people like Imtiaz Sahib and Am Rubab Sahiba, where they use formal written claims and counterclaims. Adawa ar jawab adawa.
So he's trying to establish precedent.
He is. And the genius of Fateh Islam's move here is to raise the stakes impossibly high. Well, think about it. If Seeker agrees to write and swear that the statements were not blasphemous, and then he fails to prove their innocence,
then he's not just guilty of the original thing.
He's guilty of perjury in front of a massive online audience. But if Seeker refuses to sign,
then it looks like he's hiding something. It looks like he's guilty.
It's a classic procedural trap. There's no good way out.
But Seeker's response is, well, it's a masterstroke of rhetorical defiance, isn't it? He doesn't even play the game.
Not at all. He doesn't engage with the procedural legality. He just immediately dismisses the entire framework. He calls it eso beshon wali batain.
Which is children's talk.
Children's talk, exactly. He asserts with just total confidence, my words are my writing. He argues that his physical presence, his verbal statements on a live broadcast, that's sufficient authority.
This is where the psychological battle really starts to heat up.
It is. By calling the demands childish, Seeker subtly positions himself as the mature, honest adult who has to deal with a frivolous opponent.
He's not just rejecting the rule, he's attacking the intent behind the rule.
Precisely. He views this whole procedural requirement not as a principled stand, but as funkaria trick, a calculated move of deceit.
And then he escalates it. He immediately ties that procedural demand to his opponent's identity.
He does. He explicitly states that the qadiani mind works like this, suggesting that this kind of procedural complexity is inherently deceitful, that it's designed solely to trap an unwary opponent.
And that's a really crucial piece of context for anyone listening. Seeker is reframing his rejection of the rule as a defense against what he's calling a predictable systemic deception related to his opponent's sectarian affiliation.
He refuses to allow the procedural complexity to stand as some kind of neutral framework.
So right away, the debate shifts. It's no longer, did Seeker mess up?
No, it becomes, is Fatah Islam trying to manipulate the system with procedural tricks? Seeker successfully deflects all the attention from his own vulnerability by just casting doubt on his opponent's motives from the very start.
And this whole struggle over control, specifically the power to dictate the terms, it doesn't just stop with the oath, does it?
Oh no, it manifests continuously throughout the entire transcript. There's this constant friction over time allocation.
Which seems like a minor thing, but it's not.
It's not a minor annoyance at all. It is relentless psychological warfare, fought minute by minute. Fateh Islam is repeatedly accusing Seeker of crossing the line, demanding extra time, disrupting the flow.
And Seeker's response?
Seeker, in turn, is constantly countering that Fateh Islam is deliberately interrupting him, wasting his time, and failing to stick to the clock. He argues that it's a deliberate tactic to stop him from making his substantive points.
And the moderators, Afzal Sahib and the others, they just can't seem to get a handle on it.
They can't. The inability to enforce fair time allocation, and the constant disputes over who spoke during whose minute, the request to reset the timer, the arguments over who caused the interruption, it just means that this procedural fight becomes the entire subtext of the conversation. The clock itself becomes a weapon.
So the outcome of this first section, critically, is that Seeker just successfully rejects every single procedural constraint that Fateh Islam tries to put on him.
Every single one. He refused the oath, he refused the written statement, and he refused to give up control over the time. He successfully branded Fateh Islam's entire structural foundation for the debate as a deceptive, childish trick. And in doing so, he established his own authority in that space before he even had to address the core accusation.
And this next section is where we really see Seeker's power of speech at its absolute zenith. He knows he has this initial weakness, right? The specific language he used about the prophet.
Right. The entire challenge was built on this one point.
And instead of getting into some difficult, nuanced defense, Seeker executes a breathtaking pivot.
It's a move that just defies all expectation. Fateh Islam was clearly prepared for a legalistic, textual defense, or, maybe a flat-out denial. He was ready for a fight on the facts.
The Seeker doesn't give him a defense.
No, he offers an immediate, sincere, and completely unequivocal admission of error. He publicly confesses. He says, the phrase that came out of my mouth was wrong, and then it was a slip of the tongue.
And he adds the spiritual component.
Which is absolutely crucial. He says, I sincerely regret it. May Allah forgive me.
That's not just an apology. It feels like a tactical nuclear strike on Fateh Islam's entire argument.
It is. He neutralizes his opponent's strongest weapon instantly by just preemptively acknowledging the fault. The moment he repents, the entire justification for Fateh Islam's prosecution just vanishes into thin air.
And the rhetorical framing he puts around this confession is so important. He doesn't apologize from a position of defeat or weakness.
No, he frames it as Onoya momen kajuga, the courage or, the guts of a true believer. He elevates the act of repentance into a moral virtue. He's suggesting that only a true, honest believer possesses the strength to admit such an error in public.
And he uses this to immediately draw a line between himself and his opponent.
A very clear line. He says something like, Sutiko konstesken soteko steko pass. Sutik, sediko kate succeed. Which means, if I had remained firm on it, been stubborn, or offered excuses, he would be like them.
Wow. So he casts his opponent as someone who consistently and stubbornly defends their errors, while he, Seeker, embodies this moral and spiritual humility by admitting his fault.
He transforms a moment of what should be severe vulnerability into an overwhelming demonstration of superior character. He's effectively telling the audience, I am willing to hold myself to a higher standard than my accusers are willing to hold themselves.
That is just powerful narrative construction. It makes any subsequent attack on his character seem petty and, frankly, unnecessary.
Fateh Islam is, well, he's predictably disoriented. The goalposts have just been vaporized. So he immediately tries to claim this kind of hollow victory.
Right, he argues that since Seeker admitted the error and repented or made Rousseau, the initial challenge is nullified. He says something like, if you have repented, then what was the challenge for?
Exactly. He tries to minimize Seeker's presence, framing the admission as a defeat. He suggests Seeker has fled far from the debate and is just there for publicity.
He even says, is the challenge for seeking publicity by sitting with Fateh Islam? He's trying to reduce this profound strategic move to just attention-seeking.
But Seeker is already miles past the initial accusation, and this is the crucial pivot point. Seeker counters by asserting that the challenge was never just about the specific word he used.
He broadens it.
He broadens it to be about establishing the principle of blasphemy and the necessity of repentance, universally.
So by admitting his own fault, he's actually setting a trap.
That's it. He argues that by admitting his fault, he's already established that principle for himself, and now that principle must be applied to everyone else without any exception. This is the strategic leverage he gets from his own contrition.
He uses his personal sacrifice, the admission of fault, to acquire the moral authority to enforce that standard on Fateh Islam and his entire group.
So his statement, I will not let you leave here on principle, becomes the new governing rule of the entire debate.
He ended Fateh Islam's intended prosecution and simultaneously established the ground rules for his own counter-prosecution. He completely weaponized his own repentance.
The rest of the debate, from this point on, is no longer about Seeker's past. It's entirely about exposing the potential hypocrisy within Fateh Islam's community regarding the consistent application of this principle that Seeker himself just established.
So with the challenge against him completely neutralized, Seeker launches the counteroffensive that, you feel was just waiting in the wings.
It was ready to go.
And this is where the principle he just established, this universal application of the anti-blasphemy standard, gets its first high-profile test case. He introduces a new target, a man named Mubashir Raza, who's alleged to be affiliated with Fateh Islam's group.
And this is a high-impact, very low-nuance accusation. It's designed for maximum damage. Seeker either plays or references an audio clip where Mubashir Raza allegedly made galian,
Which means
naked abuses, vulgar insults, explicitly directed against three revered figures, Prophet Muhammad, Jesus, and Moses.
Seeker's tactical control here becomes just absolute. He doesn't just offer up the evidence. He uses it to create this immovable, non-negotiable condition.
A brutal condition. He demands that Fateh Islam must, unequivocally, declare Mubashir Raza a gustakh, a blasphemer, based on the exact same standard that Seeker just applied to himself moments before.
And that's the only way forward.
It's the only way. Only once that declaration is made, condemning his own alleged associate. Only then will Seeker allow Fateh Islam to proceed with playing his counterclips or continuing the discussion on his original topic.
So he's enforced a rigid tit-for-tat rule. You came here to enforce a principle, he's basically saying. Now enforce it on your own side or you're a hypocrite.
It immediately sends the whole debate structure into complete chaos. Fateh Islam and the moderators were clearly, totally unprepared for this pivot.
They get tangled up in procedure again.
A messy procedural crisis. Fateh Islam claims he can't play his prepared clips because of technical limitations. He says he doesn't have a second device or a laptop for playback.
Which Seeker immediately uses against him.
Oh, he weaponizes that technical failure instantly. The moderators try to bring in a third party, a Mian Sahib, to handle the audio playback. Seeker agrees, but then immediately escalates the procedural demand again.
Right, he says if Mian Sahib comes on, he has to answer questions too, making it a 2-on-1.
Exactly. He briefly turns it into this unfair 2-on-1 dynamic. Now, he does eventually back down on that specific demand, but he never backs down on the core issue.
The block remains.
The inflexible condition remains. Fateh Islam must answer the Mubashir Raza question first. The entire discussion just stalls on this roadblock that Seeker himself has installed. It's a procedural stalemate designed not for resolution, but for exposure.
And this forced inaction, it allows Seeker to just keep hammering home his tactical advantage. He's making continuous accusations of evasion, of fear.
He paints Fateh Islam as intellectually dishonest and organizationally compromised. Seeker repeatedly suggests that Fateh Islam is afraid to condemn Mubashir Raza because doing so would implicate their entire community, their entire group. It would make the principle just too costly to uphold.
The rhetoric he uses here is just devastating, isn't it?
It is. He uses these rhetorical flourishes that really resonate with an audience's sense of fairness. He says things like, the resurrection will come, but he will not answer this, and he is protecting the shame of Mubashir Raza.
He turns a procedural block into a moral failure.
Let's just analyze the psychological function of this move. Fateh Islam came to prosecute Seeker for a past mistake. Seeker responded by admitting the mistake and immediately introducing a present test of Fateh Islam's character and commitment to that principle.
And by refusing to answer, Fateh Islam fails the test.
He demonstrates that his commitment to the principle is conditional. It's dependent on the identity of the person being accused, while Seeker's, by his own admission, was unconditional.
We even see Seeker later on offering Fateh Islam these highly inflated time demands, 6 minutes, 11 minutes.
Right. And it's not out of genuine generosity. It's a final, almost mocking attempt to force the required confession. He frames the time concession as invosho or isadka, charity, or chanda alms.
Which psychologically positions Seeker not as an equal participant anymore, but as this generous victor giving his opponent one last chance to salvage his reputation by just condemning his own associate.
Seeker's overarching conclusion, even before the debate technically collapses, is that the whole event was a setup designed specifically to expose the intellectual dishonesty of his opponents.
He concludes that Fateh Islam ish bagaya, he ran away.
He ran away because he couldn't face the one principled question that Seeker forced him to answer.
So the procedural path forward is just completely blocked by Seeker's immovable demand about Mubashir Raza.
It's a complete deadlock. Fateh Islam cannot condemn his own group member and maintain, organizational cohesion. But he also can't refuse to condemn blasphemy and maintain his moral authority. He's trapped.
So he's forced to retreat to the only available counter tactic he has left.
Which is ilzami jawab.
Explain that for us.
It's a reciprocal retort. It's a theological maneuver that's a bit like mutually assured destruction. Since Fateh Islam can't defend Mubashir Raza, he tries to neutralize the accusation by arguing that if Mubashir Raza's alleged statements are blasphemy, then, well, similar or even worse statements can be found, often taken way out of context, within Seeker's own canonical texts.
The goal isn't proving innocence.
Not at all. The goal is to establish universal guilt, thereby making the standard itself meaningless. It's a you did it too argument, just on a theological level.
And one of the core theological flashpoints that comes out of this tactic centers on the controversy around the term hasur.
Yes, hasur. It's a term that's typically translated as chaste or inaccessible, referring to someone who refrains from women or physical lust.
And Fateh Islam uses this how?
He delves into these academic texts, specifically quoting from Sunan Nasai al-Kubra and Tafsir Qurtubi concerning the nature of prophets, particularly Yahya or John the Baptist, being described as hasur. He uses this reference to imply a theological contradiction or some kind of flaw in Seeker's own tradition.
What's the subtle but potent implication he's trying to make?
Well, the implication is this. If hasur defines a prophet who abstains from intimacy or marriage, how does this concept apply to Prophet Muhammad, who had multiple wives? Fateh Islam's objective is to create scholarly doubt, to suggest that the definition of hasur introduces a kind of theological hierarchy, implicitly describing Prophet Muhammad as possessing a lesser virtue, and therefore, that Seeker's own revered texts harbor these latent blasphemies.
It's an attempt to turn a minor textual interpretation into a major crisis of faith for Seeker's audience.
It is. However, Seeker instantly recognizes the defensive nature of this move and immediately pivots the whole hasur discussion back onto the founder of Fateh Islam's community, Mirza Ghulam Muhammad, or MGA.
And this is where Seeker's knowledge of his opponent's foundational texts just delivers a theological bomb.
A huge one. He pulls out a direct, concrete quotation asserting that MGA, in his own work, Dafiul Bala, wrote explicitly about Jesus, or Isai, a prophet recognized by everyone involved.
And what does he claim MGA wrote?
Seeker claims that MGA stated that Jesus was not called Hasur in the Quran because, and this is the quote, MGA alleged that Jesus used to drink wine and have relations with immoral women.
Let's just pause on the gravity of that counterattack.
We should. When Fatah Islam talks about Hasur, he's dealing in subtle scholarly interpretation that requires a lot of deep theological context to even understand.
But when Seeker quotes MGA's Dafi ul-Bala,
He provides an explicit, undeniable, highly controversial accusation against a universally recognized prophet of God.
that's the rhetorical difference, isn't it? It's a theoretical debate versus a direct, calculated attack.
And Seeker instantly declares MGA the ultimate gustakh, the ultimate blasphemer, based on the very definition that Fatah Islam was trying to enforce. By accusing a prophet of heavy drinking and immorality, MGA's words are framed as a far greater, more explicit blasphemy than any abstract interpretive issue Fatah Islam had raised.
Seeker has established a crucial pattern here. Fatih Islam tries to create textual ambiguity. Seeker responds with concrete, high-impact statements from MGA's own writings that are, by definition, blasphemous under the opponent's own framework.
The textual warfare just keeps going. Fatah Islam attempts to defensively justify the vulgar language used by Mubashir Raza language that allegedly included the word bund, or buttock, concerning Hazrat Umar, a highly revered companion of the Prophet.
How does he even try to defend that?
He tries to deflect by claiming that Mubashir Raza was merely quoting Bukhari, the globally revered collection of hadith or other religious books. He's suggesting that controversial or crude narratives about the companions already exist within mainstream texts, thereby lessening the severity of what Mubashir Raza said.
Seeker's response to this is maybe his most powerful demonstration of rhetorical control over the source material.
I think it is. He vehemently denies this. He calls it a huge slander, a tumult on Bukhari. This isn't just a disagreement anymore. It's an accusation of desecrating one of Islam's most sacred textual authorities.
And he immediately demands proof.
Immediately. He forces Fatah Islam into an immediate evidentiary bind. Produce the exact citation showing vulgar language regarding Hazrat Umar from Bukhari right now.
And Seeker knows that the ability to quickly cite or verify complex textual references in a live debate is almost impossible.
Of course. And he frames the stakes of failure expertly. He declares that failure to produce the citation means Fatah Islam is the bigger blasphemer, the bigger gustakh, because he is slandering the religious texts themselves.
Slandering a canonical text is often seen as a transgression far more grievous than questioning a historical event or a person.
It is. Seeker has executed a perfect tactical reverse. He uses Fatah Islam's attempt to introduce textual complexity, the Bukhari defense, and turns it into an issue of evidentiary honesty. He puts the burden of proof impossibly back on Fatah Islam, who was already, technically unprepared to even play his own clips.
And Seeker consistently links this procedural failure back to his overarching theological point.
All the time. He closes his substantive points by repeatedly citing the widely known hadith that more than 30 liars and impostors, Kadhab and Dajjal, will claim prophethood after Prophet Muhammad.
So by repeatedly invoking the terms Kadhab and Dajjal,
he's constantly drawing a clear foundational line. He's saying his opponent's community is founded on a claim that was forewarned and condemned by Prophet Muhammad himself. This frames MGA not just as a flawed theologian, but as the fulfillment of a dangerous historical prophecy. It ties all the procedural and textual skirmishes back to a single, high-stakes theological condemnation.
So by this point, the debate has, it's completely devolved from any kind of structured confrontation into just uncontrolled crosstalk and personal accusation.
It's a total mess. The sheer toxicity and the complete lack of enforceable rules meant that the moderation Afzal Zishan Awais was totally incapacitated.
You can almost feel their desperation in the transcript.
You can. We see constant, almost desperate appeals for silence, failed attempts to reset the timer, and just repeated instances where the participants simply talk over or just outright bypass the moderator's authority. The confrontation was so intense that basic broadcast decorum just became impossible to maintain.
And it really reveals the fragility of this online debate format when it's faced with such strategic aggression.
Absolutely. And Seeker deploys his final masterful tactic in this chaos, which we alluded to earlier. It's the concession framed as defiance.
Right. He eventually agrees to Fatah Islam's demands for these exorbitant amounts of time, 6 minutes, 11 minutes.
Which he calculates he does not owe. But he agrees on one explicit, non-negotiable condition, that Fatah Islam uses that time to declare Mubashir Raza a gustakh.
And the psychological move of granting that time as charity or alms, chanda, or sadqa, it's devastating.
It really is. It communicates to the audience that Seeker is so confident in his moral and tactical victory that he can afford to be generous with the physical resources of the debate, the time, purely to force the confession.
He's the one setting the terms of surrender, even though he was the one who was initially accused.
He is, and he concludes that the entire event wasn't a debate, but a trap. A trap designed to expose the intellectual dishonesty and hypocrisy of his opponents. This is Seeker controlling the ultimate narrative, not just of the debate itself, but of its very purpose.
So let's summarize Seeker's overall strategic methodology here, because it really does demonstrate a profound mastery over rhetorical dominance.
I think we can break it down into 4 key steps. First, neutralization. He took his initial critical weakness, the original blasphemy claim, and he rendered it obsolete with immediate, sincere admission. He transformed a personal fault into a perceived virtue, the moment kajugra.
Okay, what's second?
Second, principle establishment. By repenting, he instantly established a clear, universal, and very high-stakes standard of anti-blasphemy that his opponent had no choice but to, at least verbally, adhere to.
And third, he turns that principle against them.
Yes, third is forced hypocrisy. He immediately applied that standard to Fateh Islam's own community through the Mubashir Raza demand. This forced his opponent into the untenable position of either betraying his organizational loyalties or being exposed as a hypocrite who protects blasphemers.
And the final piece.
The final piece is the procedural stalemate and evidentiary trap. He refused all procedural movement until his core demand was met, leading to the collapse of the debate's structure. And when Fateh Islam tried to pivot to those textual counterattacks, like the Bukhari defense, Seeker just countered with rigid, impossible demands for immediate textual proof. This further branded Fateh Islam as deceitful for slandering sacred texts.
It's really astounding. Seeker's power of speech meant that after the first 5 minutes or so, he was never again on the defensive about his own past mistake. The rest of the confrontation was spent executing a calculated, relentless prosecution of his opponent's moral and intellectual integrity.
He dictated the flow, he dictated the subject matter, and he dictated the evidentiary requirements.
And Fateh Islam, on the other hand, what was his strategy?
Well, he relied on tactics of procedural delay, like the written oath, the time disputes, and then this dense, evasive textual maneuvering with the Ilzami Jawab regarding Hasur. But these complex and often confusing textual references, they proved completely ineffective against Seeker's simple, high-impact moral demand. Declare your ally a blasphemer, yes or no.
And you can see that in the final chaotic moments. Fateh Islam is desperately just throwing out more scholarly references, like a quote about Jesus drinking wine from someone named Karwanvi, or referencing other controversial narratives in their books, but Seeker just maintains the pressure.
And Seeker's ultimate winning move, it wasn't a theological one, it was a legalistic one. He simply states, produce the reference, or you are the one slandering the religious texts.
And Fateh Islam's failure to adhere to this rigid evidentiary rule, which Seeker only applied when it served his offensive, became the final proof in Seeker's narrative of his deceit.
The ultimate outcome, as framed by Seeker, is that Fateh Islam's own principles, if they were applied consistently, would brand his own founder, MGA, a gustakh for slandering Jesus, and his associates, like Mubashir Raza, for slandering Prophet Muhammad and the companions.
So Seeker managed to use a defensive position to completely dismantle the foundational moral claim of his own accuser.
So to recap our deep dive here, we watched a confrontation move entirely away from theological substance into a strategic, really brutal battle fought over procedural control and the linguistic interpretation of moral standards.
The core question, who is the blasphemer? It was answered not through any kind of scholarly consensus, but through the strategic use of narrative leverage.
And Seeker's admission of fault, that courage of a believer, that was the rhetorical weapon that completely disarmed his accuser and gave him the moral authority to then impose these impossible, non-negotiable conditions on his opponent.
He understood that in a high-pressure, live broadcast environment, control over the narrative flow and the procedural clock is often far more effective than control over complex, verifiable facts.
The primary takeaway for you, as an observer of public discourse, is really understanding this concept of procedural warfare. In the world of charged online confrontation, where information is constantly being exchanged and edited, it is incredibly difficult to enforce a standard consistently.
We saw how organizational loyalties can just immediately sabotage the integrity of a stated principle.
Exactly. The critical lesson here isn't about which scripture was correctly interpreted, but about who controlled the terms of engagement.
And that raises a final provocative thought for you to consider. When you observe public confrontations in any domain, whether it's political debates, corporate negotiations, or, online cultural wars, ask yourself this. How often is the winner determined not by the substantive truth of their argument, but by the procedural tactics they deploy, the strategic concessions they make, and the impossible declarations they force their opponents to issue?
The battlefield is rarely the doctrine. The victory is almost always in the procedure.
A tough but essential lesson in rhetorical strategy. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.